Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here with us today. We will get started in just a minute or two, so bear with us and we will be right back. Okay, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for your patience and thank you all for being here today with us on the World Day Against the Death Penalty for our event titled Abolishing the Carceral State from Death Row to Guantanamo Bay. My name is Dr. Maha Hilal, and I'm the founding executive director of Muslim Counter Publics Lab, an organization whose mission is to disrupt and subvert dehumanizing narratives that are designed and deployed to justify state violence against Muslims. I want to thank our co-sponsors, including Defending Rights and Dissent, Witness Against Torture, and Aging People in Prison Human Rights Campaign. In addition to ASL interpretation, we also have CART captioning. You will see in just a minute the link for the CART captions, and you should just open a separate screen to access them, and you will see the captions there. We will also send out the transcript after the event. We'll have time for audience Q&A at the end of the event, but we ask that you be mindful of what you ask of our panelists, as many of the issues we will address today are very sensitive. When we conceived of this event, we wanted to examine the various threads of carcerality that have long been a part of this country, in addition to those that continue to evolve, to incarcerate increasing numbers of people in the United States, disproportionately Black and Brown communities. How do we begin to dismantle and abolish a system so steeped in punishment and vengeance, and pave the path towards abolishing not just the death penalty, but the carceral system altogether? How do we draw connections between mass incarceration domestically and the use of secret and offshore prisons, such as Guantanamo Bay Prison, that in many cases has been excluded from the larger discourse because of the terrorism label? Our powerful and incredible panelists will help us better understand these connections and their experiences in the carceral states and their visions of abolition. Before I turn the floor over to my dear friends and colleagues, Noel Raja, an advisory board member of Muslim Counter Publics Lab, and Khoury Peterson-Smith, the Michael Ratner Middle East Fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies, I want to take a minute to express our solidarity with the people of Gaza and Palestine who are courageously resisting brutal war and violence from Israel. As we imagine a borderless world where all carceral states are abolished, we say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And so I'm going to turn it over now to my fantastic friends and co-moderators, Khoury and Noel. Thank you all so much, and I hope you enjoy the event.
Thank you, Maha. So before we begin and meet our panelists, we want to just frame our conversation a bit for you all. We are entering today's conversation in the context of the United States, a nation that incarcerates more than 25% of its population. The system of mass incarceration perpetuates slavery, locks citizens out of their rights, controls, punishes, and tortures immigrants and those deemed as other in our society. And there are astonishing statistics about the school to prison pipeline, a system that locks especially Black and Brown children as young as preschool aged into a continual cycle of punishment and harm that restricts their futures and primes them for incarceration. Recent years we've seen Black-led uprisings against racist policing, the criminal legal system, and mass incarceration. These uprisings have forced a mainstream conversation about things that happen behind closed doors in police stations, courtrooms, and behind prison walls. It has revealed things that are intentionally hidden. The challenge remains to dismantle this system.
We're grateful to have people who've been directly impacted by the system to discuss it today as we work against it. We'll introduce this amazing panel momentarily. First, we do want to once again acknowledge that we're entering this conversation at a time where this country is deeply implicated in a raging war killing innocent people within the state of Israel. The U.S. military gives $3.8 billion in military aid annually for weapons and training for Israel. There are countless connections between policing and incarceration here and what Israel is doing to Palestinians. But it's worth noting that the control of Palestinians' movement through walls, surveillance, and formal prisons converges with the U.S.'s own project of incarceration. The same transnational corporations, like G4S and Elbit Systems, have worked in both the US and Israel and elsewhere to control people's movement. It is not a coincidence that Gaza has been called the world's largest open-air prison. So we offer this conversation as part of undoing carceral and other state violence from the US to Palestine.
Thank you. We're going to introduce our panelists now. I'm going to start with Adama Bah. Adama Bah is an immigrant rights advocate who came to the US in 1990 at the age of 2. She lived in the States and attended public schools. Then at 16, her whole world changed. The FBI raided her apartment and handcuffed her along with her father. She was detained and told she was an illegal. Her father was deported. Adama was allowed to stay, but forced to drop out of school and support her family. Now, Adama tells her story to call attention to the plight of others like her. Adama is the author of the book, Accused, My Story of Injustice.
Lyle May is an incarcerated journalist, public speaker, abolitionist, Ohio University alum, member of Alpha Sigma Lambda Honor Society, and the Authors Guild. His book, Witness, An Insider's Guide Narrative of the Carceral State, is forthcoming from Haymarket Books in April 2024. To read more of Lyle's work or follow him, sign up for his newsletter at lylecmay.com. Luke Harper, known among activists as Lucky, was involved in a dragnet arrest during a Stop Cop City week of action in Atlanta last March. He was unconstitutionally incarcerated for 3 months on a bogus domestic terrorism warrant and recently wrongfully indicted on RICO racketeering charges among 60 co-defendants. He'll soon surrender in Fulton County ahead of a high-profile trial, but continues to speak out about the right to protest and learn from others affected by state repression of dissent. For articles and other links, visit Lucky's Linktree at linktree/Lucky Luke Harper.
Mansoor Adayfi is a writer, artist, activist, and former Guantanamo prisoner held for over 14 years without charges. Adayfi was transferred to Serbia in 2016 and has struggled to make a new life for himself. He has published several New York Times pieces, including a Modern Love, a column in addition to contributing to the graphic anthology Guantanamo Voices, and the scholarly volume Witnessing Torture. He participated in the creation of the award-winning radio documentary The Art of Now, Guantanamo, for BBC Radio and the CBC podcast. which aired on Radiolab. In 2019, Adayfi won the Richard J. Margolis Award for Nonfiction Writers for Social Justice Journalism. His memoir, Don't Forget Us Here, Lost and Found at Guantanamo, was released in August 2021. We are so honored to have each of these panelists here with us today and to enter in conversation with them in a moment. And we're honored to all of our viewers. We understand that incarceration touches many of our lives, and we want to call attention to the very sensitive nature of this discussion. We know that being a speaker and also a witness on these topics can be difficult, harmful, and triggering. It is our intention to create a space as much as possible that can hold this conversation with both deep honesty and with a rising hope. We will offer resources for aftercare in the chat toward the end of this conversation today. But before we go into our first question, we're going to invite a collective intentional pause, whether you want to use that for breathing or just to put a good intention into the space. We invite you now to pause. Thank you.
Word. I now turn to our panelists with our first question. Each of your lives has been indelibly impacted by the carceral state. Information about prisons and what happens there is tightly controlled by the government. There's basically no conversation, no public conversation about what happens in prisons. Can you tell us a bit about what life is like behind prison walls?
Should I start?
Please.
Salam everyone. Hello everyone. Before I start, honestly, I'm so sad and watching the whole world unite against Gaza. I mean, not the whole world. I mean, European and United States and other countries who is supporting the genocide and massacre of innocent people. To the extent we cannot say a word. In some cases, people concerned to express their support because they were either enlisted in blacklist, banned, and so on. At this time, we just pray for our brothers and sisters in Gaza. Talk about what life behind bars. Guantanamo was a unique prison, and they don't call it a prison, they call it detention. As we know, the United States changed the language when they announced war on terror, which actually war of terror. Guantanamo wasn't the worst place, but it was the place that designed to create worst places on our planet. Before Guantanamo, there was something called black site, where people disappeared. If you are lucky, you get a life, and many people disappear and they never made it. One of the cases well-known, Gul Rahman, an Afghani who died in the CIA black sites, and many cases. So life behind bars at Guantanamo, imagine around 800 men kidnapped, tortured, imprisoned, and totally disconnected from the rest of the world. No rights, no rules. In other prison, there is some kind of setup of rules that define the treatment of the prisoners, the rights, and most prisoners in many prisons, they either serve a sentence or being held for temporary time. But at Guantanamo, it wasn't like that. Around 800 men from Muslim and children, of course, there was around 60 children, arrived at that place, have no rights, and Guantanamo turned to be American battle lab. And there is a research by Seton Hall Law University how the military American military minds turned Guantanamo to be an experimenting on prisoners. And what life to be a subject for experimenting. They needed to understand the enemy they thought they face, which is Muslims. They wanted to understand how to fight them, how to interrogate them, how to negotiate with them, how to recruit them. And Guantanamo was the perfect place to do that. Around 50 nationalities, 20 languages spoken, and different category of age, different mindset. So Guantanamo was divided into different camps with different set of rules. Psychologists, advisors, consultant, and translators was on top with the interrogators and those who conducting those experimenting on prisoners. Simply, that was Guantanamo. Being a subject of experiment, and you didn't know until later on. We as prisoners were reacting to whatever they threw at us. Yet we even in Guantanamo we were being accused as terrorists, even saying a word, even go and protest on hunger strike, damaging ourselves by hunger strike. It's not an easy thing to do. Yeah, they accused us to be Al Qaeda active cell in Guantanamo. They accused us of doing jihad and so on. And as you know, what Ron DeSantis said in his video, that they were fighting jihad in Guantanamo by doing the detainees conducting hunger strike. Once someone asked me a question, how did you spend your 20s? And that question was one of the most shocking questions for me, because I lived through Guantanamo almost 15 years. When that question asked me, how did you spend your 20s? I didn't know. I didn't know I didn't know what 20s even means. We were locked up in small cages, most of the time solitary confinement. Everything about controlling everything, every aspect in your life: sleeping, food, water, even the air, even the way air smells. You know, sometimes they would put pepper spray, sometimes they would nasty smell close to the AC, so in solitary confinement we couldn't sleep. Sometimes they will put some kind of liquids in the floor that wake you up from your sleep. So everything under control. So life, there is no life. Actually, we were dying slowly behind those bars. There's no life, because being in jail is like in between life and death. And actually, you are moving slowly toward death, because jail and torture, that took a toll of you, like destroying you mentally, physically, psychologically. So Guantanamo was and still one of the black holes, still black site, still a death sentence for the men who still there. Being in prison indefinitely, it's a death sentence. Nine men died at Guantanamo, and many still there struggle with their health conditions. So what you describe life behind bars at Guantanamo, I can tell you, is its slow journey toward death. And many of the prisoners who left Guantanamo still having many problems, either physical or psychological health issues. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
That was an incredible answer. Thank you so much, brother. I want to turn now to Lyle, brother Lyle, with the same question, just describing a bit of life behind prison walls.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, so 1 second. Okay. Can you hear Lyle now?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, they can hear you now.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you, Mansoor, for describing what you experienced. And I can certainly relate to what it means to slowly march toward death. When I was first incarcerated on death row in North Carolina, I had already experienced a couple of executions while waiting pretrial detainment.
This call will be monitored and recorded.
I didn't really have a good grasp for what that would mean for me or my future. I was in fact at Central Prison for the last use of the gas chamber in 1998, and even though I didn't, like I said, I didn't really understand it then. When I first got to death row in 1999 and would experience that initial execution, it was of a friend of mine that I'd grown close to, a guy by the name of Harvey Green. And even though the gas chamber was no longer in use and there was now what they call the more medicalized version of execution, it didn't make it easier. It didn't make it any less than. This guy, I'd gotten to know Harvey. He kind of helped me out, took me aside, and got me to stand up straight. Because after a capital murder trial where the state effectively dehumanizes you to the point where they make society believe it's okay to put you to death, you feel really, really low. I can't describe a lower point in my life, or probably that of anybody else's. So, in talking with Harvey and pulling me aside, just telling me that it would be hard, but at this point, it would only get better. That it was kind of a crazy thing for him to tell me coming to death row, because I thought, well, surely it'll get worse when they take me and strap me down to the gurney and put me to death. But he's like, well, there's always going to be death. It's kind of what you're going to do in between now and then that's going to matter. And I took that to heart, and I tried to keep it close with me, even as Harvey was executed, and then many others were put to death subsequently after that. And I would struggle to cling to that belief, even as I lived through 33 executions. What that means that writing, I try to give that experience. I try to give voices like Harvey's meaning, and to not just simple, so that he's not forgotten, so that the offer of friendship and mentorship that he and others have given to me and some of my peers here doesn't go unnoticed, even while the state did its best to kind of misinform and disinform the public about who we are as human beings. And I think that more than anything else is really what is so crucial about understanding places like Guantanamo and black sites and death row and prison in general, is that much of the discussion that doesn't happen, a lack of conversation about what occurs behind the wall, isn't a lack of conversation, it's misinformation. It's intentional, and it's about the state and the federal government controlling a narrative that they have no right to. And that's what makes what we do so incredibly important in countering that narrative.
Thank you so much, Brother Lyle. And I should point out that that Lyle actually is calling in from prison at this moment, which is why we can't see the video. But we're so grateful for your presence here. I wanted to go to Adama with the question of describing a bit about life behind prison walls.
We don't really get perspective and things that we go through. Now, for me, when I was detained, I was a minor. So I was in a maximum juvenile detention center. So our every move is controlled. What we did, how time we ate, what time we used the bathroom. But for us, we also went to school. So of course, what we were taught in school was based on what they wanted us to learn about. We didn't talk about the criminal justice system in school, but it's really a dehumanizing way. And there's a reason why prisons walls are cut off from the world. They don't want you to know the inhumane ways that they're treating people there. They want to be able to continue to do what they are doing without the world saying, no, that is not right. That's why it's very important, the people that you have on this chat, on this conversation, for us to tell you what happens behind a prison wall, the impact that it does, and how we can reform it to change it to really actually help people in our communities. So thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Lucky, we'd love to hear from you.
Right. Thank you so much for having me today. Before I was arrested in March, I was pretty much on the other side of the wall. I'd never met really anyone, like no one in my family had ever been to jail or faced any kind of legal issues. And so being arrested and being incarcerated for 3 months in DeKalb County Jail was obviously very disruptive, but something that I guess a theme of it was this sort of psychological aspect of it, of not having control. I think I relied so much on word of mouth at the time, and I'm curious if other people like relate to that thing where like you don't get to have a history of what's going on. You don't get to record what's happening to you. You just have to remember, and they're the like worst memories like ever. And I was told from people commenting on my arrest to my first bond hearing, my second, my third, my fourth, my preliminary hearing, what was supposed to happen in reentry, whether I was supposed to be indicted or not. And what was supposed to happen didn't happen. And then, you know, in even in jail, there would be breakfast was supposed to happen, but it would happen like 4:30 a.m. or maybe like 11 a.m. And then maybe we only get our lunch and dinner at 8 p.m. because that's when they happen to have some worker passing by who can hand us the sandwiches and trays. And I think just the ways that I had to change how I asked for things, how I got my needs met was so drastic, and it was something very disruptive. And it's yeah, I guess like something that I've had to realize is that not everybody's like following the rules.
Thank you all for sharing with us. We've heard what you're saying, and we can hear the ways that this system of incarceration is designed to break human beings down physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And so we honor the stories that you're sharing, and we hold them in the deepest
Yeah,
part.
I'd like to add one thing really important, which is about life behind bars. You know, from my experience and like witnessing and watching the experience around me at Guantanamo. When we arrived at Guantanamo, we had no shared life with each other. We didn't know each other, and there is no connection. We are all Muslims. The only connection we have our humanity, our faith. And you know, years later, when people ask, "How guys do you survive at Guantanamo?" and let you know that prisons change people. It forge a new person, a new human being. Because what makes us as unique as human being, you know, is our DNA, of course, but what makes us like as a unique person is our faith, our knowledge, experience, memory, emotion, our language, our relationship, our memories. That's what makes each of us a unique individual human being. And I consider that as other DNA. So when we arrive at Guantanamo, we behave the way we used to behave every single day because that's who we are, praying, talking, trying to figure out what's going on there. But we weren't aware that the more we stay at Guantanamo, the more our brain would start construct a new life, a new memories, a new relationship, a new experience, a new knowledge, a new relationship, a new view of yourself or your faith, and that become who you are, become a new you. And the more you stay in the prison, the more you are distanced from your previous life, from who you are, from your family, from your relationship, from your memories, from your experience, knowledge, and everything. And the new things that you constructed, it become you. It shapes your view, your opinion, your mindset. And that's how Guantanamo changed me for the 15 years. I can't talk about myself. Yes, Guantanamo is with me everywhere. Every single is part of our life. There's no deny it will stay with me for the rest of my life. And what's worse of that? When you get out of the prison, you live in the stigma. You are in Guantanamo, people assume that you are a terrorist, that you're a bad guy, that you were there for a reason, regardless. So, life behind bar, if you are not aware, especially we as young as me, we didn't have someone to guide you, to advise you, because no one has experience of the prison. In 2010, when I look at myself, when things changed in the detention, I looked at myself. I was an angry person. I went through stages of hate, grudge, fear, anger, and you have to go through it if you want to get out of it. And worst of that, there is no one to tell you what's going on there. Interrogators torture you, guards torture you, and everyone try to extract the worst of you. Of course, if you live under circumstance, that what they try. They try to show the world that you are the bad person by put you in circumstances that you behave abnormal there. So, alhamdulillah, sticking to our faith, to our who we are later on, I started working on myself with education. Education, at that time, I believe that education only my way to fix myself, only my way to build my life, the only way to heal for whatever there. So I started reading, learning English, teaching others, at the same time fighting the injustice within the prison itself. So have we recovered? No, it's going to take years and years to not to recover. I would say relatively to heal from the experience. But alhamdulillah, I think I'm trying to channel Guantanamo experience in the right way to fight the injustice at Guantanamo and to bring awareness of the truth about Guantanamo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mansoor, for adding that, and you're really put us into our next question. So we'd love to hear more. You highlighted this beautifully, you know, what you did when you came out and the way that you saw education as this path for you of rebuilding. We'd love to hear from the other panelists, you know, in the face of the system of dehumanization, what are the ways that you've either individually or collectively asserted your humanity, either while behind bars or when when you came out? And I'd like to start with Lyle because he's joining us by phone and he needs to call in every so many minutes. So just to honor, that complicated system, we're going to let Lyle start with this one. So again, Lyle, just any ways, big or small, that you either as an individual or collectively within prison have asserted your humanity.
Okay, go ahead, Lyle.
Okay, thank you for that question. And as far as asserting my humanity or those my peers asserting their humanity here, we have to kind of seize the moments as they come. For myself, I do a lot of writing. It's what I do to challenge a lot of the narratives that are put out there about incarcerated people in general, but also people specifically on death row. And this idea of what death row is, how it's supposed to be for the worst of the worst when it's not anything of the sort. It is just a political weapon wielded by populist elected officials and randomly selected for people who may be innocent or may be guilty, but nonetheless deserve the right to live. So in asserting humanity, you do your best to show that you're not that person that you say that you are, and to really show how the criminal legal system is designed to oppress the poor, minorities, and marginalized in general. But writing is largely how I assert that humanity. Like Mansoor, I've done my best to educate myself while incarcerated, and that's certainly a part of the process in both fighting the mental decay that is indicative of long-term incarceration, especially on death row, but in being able to find ways to assert that humanity, to show that you are more than just a particular label and that you are a human being. One of the very specific ways and things that I often write about are the friends of mine who have been executed. I do my best to kind of tell some of their stories and things that they've related to me before the state took them, and to build on it, because the whole idea of being sentenced to death is that you're not worth life, that you're not worth society, that you're not worth the air that is pumped in and out of your lungs. So I show that is false by, displaying things that these people who the state claims are worthless have taught me, whom I've learned from, and I assert their humanity and assert mine in the process.
Thank you, Lyle. Adama, would you like to go next?
I'm just hearing I'm just hearing you guys talk, and it just brings back, what I went through. I know when I was detained, it was stripping me of my identity, and that was my hijab. I had to fight to keep my hijab on. And I just remember how they the demeanor, the way that the guards talk to you and treat you. And for me, it's when I left, how do you heal? How do you fight the system? And it's just pretty much advocating. I said, I'm not going to allow what happened to me happen to the next person. That's how you change the system. You stop others from going through what you were going through. And then you educate them. You have them navigate, you teach them how to navigate a system that's not welcoming, that's not created for them. And it's going to take a long time. But in a selfish way, I found a healing path through this. I found a way to say, well, I'm going to make sure you don't go through this. I'm going to make sure you know your rights and use them. Because one of the things is that you have to teach people how to advocate for themselves. The reason why is that because when law enforcement gets involved, they isolate the person, they interrogate them without anyone there to advocate for them. So when you teach them how to use these tools to speak up and teach them how to look for signs of where they're tricking you, then they change their narrative, they change their life. But it's been a challenge. There are days like Mansoor say that I'm like, wow, I can't believe I went through this. It takes time. There are days that it's hard, and there's days that I'm like, I got this. But I think for me, the healing is the advocacy part and using my voice and using whatever time I have to make sure I give back and teach people that there's a way out. But also stories telling. Telling my story is also a way of also bringing people to understand that there's something wrong with the criminal system. There's something wrong. We have to change it. We have to change how it impacts people and how we treat people that are accused. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adama. And you bring up an important point, and Mansoor brought this up in Lyle, but the ways that you're treated and the labels that get placed on you, and the way that we need to combat those and tell our own stories and own our own stories and educate one another, so that we can move towards ending this system. So Lucky, I'd love to invite you to join this conversation. And I know you're joining from a place of the state trying to repress a movement. And so if you want to also talk a bit about, that kind of unique type of dehumanization, right? And squashing of your movement that you're a part of.
Yes, and thank you. I really appreciate this question. I think I might approach it a little differently. So I mentioned that I'm new to activism and engaging in movement spaces, and okay, well, this isn't like drama, but I got an email from somebody who I'm in a workshop with, and I had asked for just their guidance on speaking about my involvement in this workshop. And I'm not going to say who it is because it doesn't matter. But they said you should be centering Black and Indigenous communities who are affected by, issues related to Stop Cop City, instead of talking about your reentry experience when you share about Stop Cop City or Defend the Atlanta Forest, or talking about the carceral system, or being in conversations about abolitionists or anarchists, or whatever you want to, whatever comes up. And I think one of the ways that I've claimed my humanity is been trusting other people. When I was in jail, I received tremendous support from people providing their numbers just to have me be able to call, from having support with food, with commissary, and getting money on my phone. And it wasn't my time to, I guess, be in that position of asserting my humanity and advocating for myself. I had no idea what I was doing. I still don't. And when I had to when I had to trim my nails, or when I had to re-up on medication that had been delayed for a week in jail, I had so many supports, and some of them were other inmates. There were people who told me, and I'll never forget, it was on Tuesday or Thursday, go to the guard desk and bug them around 10 a.m. so that you can get your nails clipped. And those are the only days that they'll do it. And the one nail, whatever trimmer has to be on your floor on that day. And it took me a month to cut my nails, which is, of course, like a benign sort of inconvenience, right? But it was because of being able to, having the opportunity to trust in these complete strangers. I didn't know what they were in for, to get this one need met, so that when I was writing, I wasn't scratching the paper with dangly claws. No judgment though, if you love long nails. But I think when it comes to sort of asserting my humanity, it was my belonging in humanity.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lucky. I'm going to pass it over to Huli now to ask our next question.
Here we go. This is a direct question for Lyle. Lyle, you've been on death row for 26 years. 26 years of enduring a certain form of violence and precarity. And, there is a conversation about that kind of confinement as a kind of torture. And I wonder if you could speak to the question of the question of, is this time on death row, do you consider it a form of psychological torture?
You can go ahead, Lyle.
Okay, thank you for that question. The short version is yes, it is very much psychological torture. The longer version is actually a matter of proving as much to the courts, because it's difficult to get them to understand what cruel and unusual punishment is. Mainly because a lot of the courts have become very partisan and conservative and largely populist at this point. But if you dig down into it, it's as simple as this. When a prosecutor declares that he or she is going to pursue the death penalty in a murder case, they're expressing their intent to kill you. Now, as an ordinary citizen, if you express your intent to kill somebody, it's a crime. It's a felony. You're communicating a threat because you're robbing that person of their sense of freedom and safety. Well, when the state does it, because it's an extension of a law that its citizens support, maybe not directly, but indirectly to their voting or lack thereof, they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to say, well, we're going to pursue the death penalty. And then when a jury passes that verdict and says that, yes, you deserve to die, they're basically green-lighting the state to carry out its threat against you. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what side you fall on it, due process allows us to challenge that through various appeals, both at the state and the federal level. And when that occurs, it's kind of a catch-22. You are once trying to preserve your life while simultaneously experiencing the prolonged confinement on death row, under which you are constantly threatened with death. And then with every execution that is carried out, that threat is punctuated and emphasized and amplified and magnified. And every time you hear about executions in another state, it just reverberates with your own experience. It doesn't matter if North Carolina hasn't executed anybody since November of 2006. The fact is that other states do. And every time they do, I experience that. I live with that. I live through that. And when you have to think about what that means for you on a daily basis, whether it's through the red jumpsuits we wear, through our confinement in a cell, or whenever a pair of handcuffs and shackles and chains are placed on us, or when we're called inmates, or when we're reminded that we're on death row. Every aspect of confinement is just an emphasis of that threat. And as long as that penalty is on the books in a state or the federal government, that threat exists. And it's not just a threat for myself, but it's a threat for ordinary citizens too, who are wholly innocent in this moment and haven't yet experienced a set of circumstances that have put them under a charge of murder, or have put them before a before a death qualified jury, or have put them on death row, because we know that there are innocent people that are exonerated from death row. Currently in North Carolina, since I've been here, 9 people have been exonerated. That's fully a quarter of the number of people who have been put to death. And that doesn't even talk about the extensive error rate. So when you consider the uncertainty, when you consider just the constant reminder of your purpose here, whether you're being told you're not here to be rehabilitated, whether you're being told that you don't have particular rights because you are on death row.
This call will be monitored and recorded.
Or whether you're being reminded of being monitored. It's always a constant reminder of what the state intends to do. I want to share something. I was recently told by an editor when I made the statement in some writing that I was submitting for publication that a death sentence is a statement of the state's intent to prematurely end the citizen's life, but that's my opinion. And I'm here to tell you that's not an opinion. That's a fact. It is an experience that cannot be denied. It's stated in the death warrant that is signed when the jury announces its verdict, and the judge wishes that God have mercy on your soul, because apparently they can't. And it's restated throughout your incarceration, and then emphasized on the death certificate of people who have been put to death, and the cause of death being homicide. So you have to believe, even if you're not necessarily experienced in the psychology elements and what it means to be psychologically tormented, that every time that you're reminded that your life doesn't really belong to you, that your future can very much end on a gurney in front of witnesses, that there are people in the free world who support and approve of you being not just tortured, but executed at the end of the day, that has an impact on the way that you think. And as has already been said, that it changes the way that you think. It changes the way you identify, how you believe in the future, how you experience life in general. And that will always be with me, because it has molded me into the man that I am today from the youth that came here, but also it drives me. So I guess in experiencing that torment, it's important that you recognize that that is the adversary. Those are the people who want you to suffer, who want you to be here. And it's important to resist that with all of your being.
Thank you, Lyle. And we, take an intentional pause to honor what you've shared with us. I'm going to direct our next question towards Mansoor. You spoke about this a little bit earlier, but being a formerly detained prisoner at Guantanamo Bay comes with a lot of stigma. due to the constant deployment of violent narratives by the US and other countries about Muslims. How have you been able to challenge and push back on these narratives?
First of all, I would like to talk about the asserting our humanity in Guantanamo. You know, at Guantanamo, we were turned into just numbers. And everyone come to work at Guantanamo, guards, camp staff look at you as a bad terrorist and so on. And most of the guards and camp staff were told that the people who were responsible for 9/11, those who was in Guantanamo, I lived for years trying to prove that I'm a good person, I'm a human being. At some point, I said, okay, like F word, I'm not doing this anymore. I didn't care what you think about me. It doesn't matter. What helped us at Guantanamo to survive or to stick to our humanities, like we had each other, supporting from each other. And we were not only the victims of Guantanamo. Even those guard or camp staff, nurses, wherever, who also tried to stick to their humanity were targeted and become victims. So when those guard and camp staff arrived at Guantanamo, they were told something, but when they lived with us every single day, they witnessed us praying, eating, sleeping, every single day. They become part of our life. So they were in a situation of conflicted, what they had been told and what the fact is. And some of them, some of them convert to Islam. Some of them, come to apologize to us. Hey, guys, we are so sorry. It's not our country. It's not we were told. Some of them pay a high price, like James Yee, who came to Guantanamo as a Muslim chaplain. He was an army captain. Yet when he stood against the abuse, the dehumanization, and the torture at Guantanamo, he became a detainee. He was put in orange jumpsuit, classified an enemy combatant, accused of espionage, aiding the enemy, and so on. And you can read his book, For God and Country. So within Guantanamo, we started fighting the stigma within the system itself. We start resisting by hunger strike, fighting the guard, arts, challenging the narrative that imposed on us. We didn't wait until we get released, but we thought after Guantanamo, people understand what happened there. So life after Guantanamo is behind me here, a book, we are working on it now. We found out us blacklisted in many countries, financial institutions, colleges, airports, Interpol, and we had to fight all of that, being at Guantanamo. So in my case, I always wear the orange jumpsuit, always the orange color, and close Guantanamo. I tell people, yes, I was in Guantanamo. I'm not hiding anything. I argue with the people, writing about it, And I think, and I believe that as a victims, we have a duty to speak out about the truth. It's mandatory. It's not optional, because silence, I believe, it is another form of oppression. Silence is give the oppressor a tool to oppress you, a tool, giving supporting their narrative, countering them, bring the truth to the people. That's what we are doing now. I'm trying to do all my work around that. Last week we had the conference at the EU Parliament, and we talked about the closure of Guantanamo. Also, this week I was in Warsaw attending the OSCE conference. We brought Guantanamo again to talk about Guantanamo. So bringing the truth and bringing the awareness is fighting the U.S. government. And as you know, Guantanamo, one of the most secretive prisons in the world. And also going after those institutions that blacklisted us, either the Interpol or others, and so on. And, exposing out to the media, speak out. And this is one of the platforms, the conference, the events, webinars, and so on. This is really, really important because Guantanamo now is Guantanamo everywhere, and it's the same style, being linking people to terrorism, indefinitely imprisoning them, torturing them, and controlling the media narrative. And what the countries do, it just now what happened now in Gaza too. They are fighting terrorism, terrorists. So basically, it is really important to bring awareness, to speak out, and I pay a heavy price by doing so. Trust me. But I don't care. I don't mind. I already paid 15 years Guantanamo. It wasn't worse than that. But I like to make sure that nobody will go through what we have been through, and speak out. It's not an option, it's obligatory. It is mandatory that we speak out as victims. And also I refuse to play a role of victim.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brother Mansoor. I want to turn to Adama. There is so little conversation in this country about the war on terror at all. And what little there is excludes Black Muslim stories, excludes those from the conversation around who was impacted by the war on terror. We're curious how you've been able to challenge this narrative, and what the reception has been.
That's actually a very good question. So when I was arrested, I was only 16 when I was accused of terrorism. And during that time, the demographic of people that were detained were mostly Arab, South Asians, not really Black Muslims. So a lot of those were deported after. And the demographic were mostly men. I became the first female minor after 9/11 in the United States to be accused of terrorism. So when I was released, it was the perception of the community and how to get those resources of being a Black woman. And in the conversation, Black Muslims understood that I was innocent because they have been, for generations, been, ongoing accusation and abuse from law enforcement in this country. So they understood that I was innocent. But how do you help when they're already trying to help their community from law enforcement, drugs, eviction, and so much more? And I'm just one Black woman who've been accused of this. And so then the Muslim community, they weren't so helpful. They weren't so open and welcoming. I think that's several reasons. As one, the community was just healing from the aftermath of 9/11 and the impact that they felt. Two is just they were afraid. They were generally afraid of being attached to someone like me. And then three, they thought I was an informant. To this day, some people swear up and down that I was an informant. But they didn't understand that historically Black Muslims have been going through this. So there was no space for me to communicate with Black Muslims about what I was going through. So it's sad to say this, but I became the poster face for Black Muslims after 9/11 that were accused of terrorism. Of course, people they knew my name, they knew my story, but they didn't understand what the struggle was. Where can I get the help that I need? Where can I get the support that I need? And I had to rely on organizations that were doing this work mostly for Hispanics, because they knew the impact that their community were going through. I had to get support from white community who understood that I was innocent and wanted to advocate and help. So everyone that did not look like me were the ones that helped me, the LGBTQ community and plus. And I think that's where now I have to change. Now that I've received that help, I have to come back and say, well, what about the Black Muslims? What can we do for them? How can we support them in times like this? But I feel like it's done on purpose to divide the community. You can't have us all united as one. So if you divide and split, oh, she's Black Muslim though, you're an Arab Muslim, you're an Asian Muslim. It's done on purpose. It's designed that way. So I'm here to change that narrative and that story and to shed my story, but also other Black Muslims. Throughout the time that I've been doing this work, I have met Black Muslims that were detained and accused of terrorism. And unfortunately, they don't get the same support as South Asians or Arabs, or with even the legal support. But I think with us now being impacted and coming back and saying, well, here's the blueprint and how to survive this. Here's the community that you can get the help that you need. And I think that's what's working now. So we're changing the narrative. Even though there's so much pressure, we shouldn't be the only one. So I ask other people who haven't been impacted to join in this movement and help us.
Thank you so much, Adama. You bring up this beautiful point of solidarity and of connecting our movements and our momentum. And you're absolutely right, right? Us being divided is what helps perpetuate these systems. So we're going to turn to one more individual question that's going to be for Lucky. And then we're, please, from the audience, submit your questions for our amazing panelists, and we'll be sure to get to those next. So Lucky, how do you think we can sustain, this momentum of what's happening that's, challenging Atlanta's Cop City? And also, what precedents do you see happening right now in Atlanta that you think, are really dangerous that we should be pushing back against?
Right. Thank you. I guess reflecting on the charges against me, RICO charges, which are racketeering charges, if I've had to learn what RICO charges means and what gang affiliations mean, and I've had to learn a lot about this indictment as a co-defendant. I don't have like a legal background, and what I've taken away just from my own personal experience is that the charges alleged against me are intended to suppress dissent. They're unconstitutional and baseless and designed mostly to intimidate me and other protesters. And I think, my case represents sort of the weaponization of the criminal legal system. And my case, whether that has to do with my arrest in March under domestic terrorism charges, which weren't included in a warrant, or it's this recent indictment and connected cases. My case and similar cases continue to sort of approach this blueprint of suppression of not just movements in Atlanta, but everywhere. And I think what's motivated me to be involved has been everyone I've collaborated with, and I've definitely been met with a lot of generosity and kindness and patience, a lot of patience through all of this. And I think a takeaway from speaking to a lot of different movements about the right to protest, because this does really affect every movement, is that people, ask about this or tell me what they think. Imagine what it will cost to win, and make progress, whether that's gradual or it has to do with a referendum, and then imagine what we stand to lose and how we will, in solidarity, bear the sort of fallout of that. And as far as what precedents do I think people should worry about, I am not a lawyer. I don't have much legal experience. I mean, I've watched like Legally Blonde once, but that doesn't really, it's not really, I'm not barred, okay? But I think I suddenly went from volunteer to protester, kind of against my will. And I was only in jail for 3 months, and it was hard. But part of my incarceration was the fact that I didn't get to address this false narrative about just my life. I mean, I was being called all these different things, and for the first time, I think, really, I had no control over how I was being characterized. I had worked in marketing for almost a decade before I was arrested, and at no point was I ever given final say on these press releases from the DA, or I was never interviewed by, these mainstream media news outlets for like final approval of, how I'm going to be called an outside agitator, or a violent extremist or whatever. And so I think, a theme as I've been learning about other movements and the way that they secure and sort of share space in the right to protest space. I think I would encourage everyone to like imagine that win and like imagine what that's going to cost. If that's a lot more work here and not there, or how people prioritize. I think it's also important to imagine what we stand to lose and how we're all going to weather that, because we will.
Thank you so much, Lucky. Okay, we're moving into really the end of our conversation. We have a question for you all, which is, what does abolition mean to you? And kind of part of that is, how have your religious or spiritual beliefs shaped your ideas on abolition? And I want to begin with Brother Mansoor.
Yeah. Abolition means, first of all, we need to create change within the system itself. So to be able to make those changes, we need to bring again awareness of ongoing problems within the system itself. And secondly, we need to educate the young generations about those kind of problems, because what we are facing a systematic oppression by the state. And for me, like, when it comes to faith about the my my view about the
We may have lost Mansoor temporarily. Can you hear us, Brother Mansoor? Okay. In that case, we can come back to Mansoor, but let me switch to Sister Adama, this question of, what does abolition mean to you? And yeah, how have your religious or spiritual beliefs kind of shaped your notions of abolition?
I think it's important to understand, depending on which part of the world or what you've been impacted by, defines what abolitionism means to you, right? But we're not often included in that conversation. So you want to have this movement, but how am I not included in the conversation? I've been impacted by NYPD a lot. And I'm not often, I know there's people who are on the movement to abolish it, but they have never spoken to me about how to abolish it, or what does it look like to abolish it. And so when we do that, we have to include everyone in the conversation, the pro police, the non-pro. So for me, it's having everybody in that conversation and talking about the impacts and how to change it. Because if we continue to tackle this on our own, we're not going to get anywhere. We need to collaborate together and work together and figure this out together. And this is coming from somebody who's impacted. And I'm often told, oh, well, your views are different, but you cannot tell me how, when I'm constantly impacted by the system. I'm constantly being stopped by NYPD. You cannot tell me how to live and move in this space when I'm constantly the victim. So those are my views, and that's how I think we can start. But I would love to hear what others think.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Appreciate you. Lucky, this question of what abolition means to you.
Yeah, absolutely. This brings to mind a moment when I was in jail, and this is just how it worked in my pod. They would have different calls throughout the day when certain things would happen. So when the mail truck, when the mail cart would come, it would be mail call. And when the nurse came with people's medications, or taking people's blood pressure and stuff like that, it would be med call. And I heard a call one day that I was like, I don't know what this one is. It was prayer call. And I grew up in the Roman Catholic faith. Both of my parents are actually Irish. I was adopted at a very young age. But anyway, this prayer call was like a new thing that a couple of the guys thought about doing during like a break in the day. I think this was around the time of Ramadan, but I don't, because I just remember I thought maybe that's what it was, because people got their meals at different times, and it was a whole to-do. But so for this prayer call, basically, I wrote a poem while people were doing it, and it was just a group of men who stood in a circle together, and they sort of threw together a service in a way. And it was sort of like non-denominational praying, and it was so it was a tight group, and each man would start with what he was going through, what was on his mind, and people would say, "Thank you so much for sharing, and we're praying for you." And they would move on to the next person, and they move on to the next person, and they shut off the TV. Willingly shut off the TV for this prayer call. And even though I didn't participate, I felt very much a part of that moment. And that's what the abolitionist perspective looks like visually to me, is that prayer call of these men who don't know each other, who might be afraid, who would end up having fights, or who have had fights before, or who had disagreements, or who were from, who were different ages and from different religious backgrounds, which is fascinating, because they just happened to be, they were like, well, who else am I going to pray with in here? They just found each other. And that's what that looks like to me, is that memory of like, all right, we're all in here. We can't do anything about it today. So what are we going to do for ourselves now? And that's what that looked like. And it was a beautiful moment to witness. And I'm glad I documented it, because it speaks to not just the kindness that I've received from activists outside, but the kindness I've received from my fellow man.
Really appreciate that. We talk quite a bit about abolition, but very rarely do we get to hear about perspectives on what that looks like, the work of abolition, from behind the walls. So big gratitude for that. And want to turn to Lyle and ask also what abolition means to you, and how your religious and or spiritual beliefs have shaped that.
You can go ahead, Lyle.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that question. In terms of the influence of my faith, I am Catholic. I was what you call a cradle Catholic. I grew up Catholic, participated as an altar server as a child, and then reconfirmed my faith when I got to death row. And that has grounded me in a lot of different ways that is not really grounded in the Catholic Church. Unfortunately, one of the things that I often discovered in my time on death row is that a lot of Christianity is very hypocritical. They are very supportive of, they're very much against abortion, but not so vocal when it comes to the death penalty. That's unfortunate, because I've had conversations with people who claim to be abolitionists and who think that it's okay to give people a life without parole sentence and trade with the death penalty. And as somebody on death row, I can personally tell you that I don't want to die in prison, and I don't find that life without parole, death by incarceration, is a nicer alternative to being put to death. I think it's in a lot of ways very worse. And so there was a number of my peers who would willingly drop their appeals and volunteer to be executed to effectively commit state-sanctioned suicide, then serve the rest of their life on a prison yard somewhere, growing old and dying in prison. So in terms of abolition, I'm like, don't half-step it. Don't believe that abolition for a portion of the criminal legal system is enough, or that in terms of facing this idea of decarcerating the U.S. or of ridding ourselves of the prison industrial complex, that it's going to be as easy as tinkering at the edges, because what we also know from the history of prisons is that tinkering at the edges gets us worse punishments. Life without parole is a result of other abolitionists who thought that it was a safer alternative to the death penalty. The penitentiary itself was thought to be a reform instead of brutalizing and whipping people and hanging them and breaking them on the wheel. So when we talk about abolition, when I think about abolition, I think of those historical moments that have made things worse in an attempt to reform. And that's kind of how I approach a lot of my writing. You know, I point these things out. I, try to inform people that it's good, it's awesome, in fact, that they want to get involved, that they want to decarcerate their country and their neighborhoods and their communities. And we should definitely all work toward that. But I think it's also very important in this process in pursuing abolition to, be fully informed on what that means. So in a lot of ways, it means addressing the problem before it starts. It means, reaching somebody before they're incarcerated, because a lot of what incarceration is begins before you go to prison, before you reach the jail, before you have a first contact with law enforcement. A lot of what abolition means is addressing problems where they begin in the school system, addressing problems like what we're seeing nationally with the book bans and censorship. That's really where incarceration begins, and where we have to take the fight of abolition, because what they're trying to do by banning various narratives in the school systems and public libraries is cement, or further cement.
This call will be monitored and recorded.
So in a lot of different ways, abolition is preemptive. It's not reactive, which is what incarceration is. And in order to really be, or to manifest that ideal of abolition, we have to preempt where it begins, and that is often in the classroom, and it's through information and misinformation. It's through gaps in media coverage. It's through politicians and elected officials, both at the local and national level, who run on these tough on crime narratives. That's where abolition begins, in my mind.
Wow. Well, these are really incredible answers, responses from really incredible speakers. Just filled with gratitude for this amazing panel. And as we are moving to a close, I'm just going to say a word or two and pass it to my co-moderator Nawal, and then we'll wrap up with our host Maha. And I'll just say, one of the themes that comes through so clearly in this conversation is really how intentional the carceral system is at isolating people from society, isolating people within jails and prisons. When one is released and re-enters the rest of society, the isolation follows people because of the stigma. And just really grappling with that. And of course, thinking too, listening to you all and engaging, and also thinking about Gaza and thinking about, again, isolation, stigma, the notion that people deserve the kind of inhumane treatment that you all have described. So it really speaks to the importance of what you all have described in terms of your work inside of jails and prisons to break that isolation, and what you do beyond the walls as well. So grateful, and feel certainly a renewed resolve around overcoming isolation. So big gratitude to you all.
Yes, I echo that, Khoury. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your stories with us, and we hold those and we honor them. We will be putting an aftercare menu in the chat as a resource, and we're going to pass it on now to our host, Maha.
So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. It was really such an honor to be here with all of you and our incredible panelists. I know that I learned a lot, and I know that there is a lot of work to do to abolish the carceral state, not just the United States, but all carceral states. And this includes, as we're watching unfold, Israel's war against Gaza and the Palestinians. So as we close today on the World Day Against the Death Penalty, we hope that our commitment to ending the death penalty is renewed. We hope that when you leave here today, you're inspired to take action, to think about the ways in which carcerality has been such a big part of our lives, and to think about why the call for abolition now is so urgent. So again, just to close out, my name is Dr. Maha Hilal, and I am with the Muslim Counterpublics Lab. Please do visit our website online and get involved. We do have a specific program called Redressing Injustice Help Desk, in which we try to support those who are incarcerated and those who have been released from incarceration. And so this is one of the events we put on for this program. And we're really very interested in making and continuing to make the connections across all forms of carcerality. So we hope you enjoyed the program. We will be sending an email with the recording as well as the transcript. So stay tuned for that. And please do spread the word. Please do buy our authors' books here that we have put in the chat, and we'll also include in the email. And do what you can in joining us to call for abolition and to abolish the carceral state. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again soon.